The United States Department of Justice just walked into federal court and asked a judge to permanently erase the convictions of people who were found guilty by a jury of their peers of plotting to overthrow the United States government by force, not reduce the sentences, not file an appeal, permanently erase them, gone, forever, as if it never happened. And here is the part that should stop you cold. The people whose records they are wiping were convicted of seditious conspiracy. That means a conspiracy, a plan to use force to prevent the peaceful transfer of presidential power. That is one of the most serious charges that exists in American law. And the DOJ just said, never mind. So the question you need to be asking right now is not whether this is legal. The question is, what does it mean when the government decides that some crimes, depending on who commits them and who is in power, simply do not count anymore? If nobody in your life is sitting you down and breaking this down for you, no teacher, no news anchor, no politician, that is exactly why this channel exists. NationPulse is here for the people who want the truth stripped of spin. Hit that subscribe button right now so you never miss what they do not want you to know. This is not a button, this is a movement, and you are part of it now. Let's get into it. Welcome back to NationPulse. I am going to break this down the way it deserves to be broken down. Not with party talking points, not with political theater, with facts, with context, and with the questions that actually matter. Because what happened on Tuesday, April 14th, 2026, is one of the most significant legal events in modern American history, and most people scrolled right past it. You are not going to be most people, not today. Let's start with the basics, because the details here are critical, and the framing you are going to see in the media has been, to put it politely, incomplete. The Department of Justice, the federal agency responsible for enforcing the law of the United States of America, filed motions in federal court to vacate the criminal convictions of multiple high-profile defendants connected to the January 6th, 2021 breach of the United States Capitol. Vacate. That word matters. It does not mean reduce a sentence. It does not mean grant an appeal. It means void, legally erase the verdict. Make it as though it never existed in the eyes of the law. These were not minor charges. These were not trespassing tickets or misdemeanor convictions. The specific charge at the center of these filings is seditious conspiracy. Let's pause on that for a moment, because that phrase gets thrown around and people's eyes glaze over. So let me make it plain. Seditious conspiracy under federal law means two or more people conspiring, meaning planning together, to use force to overthrow the government of the United States, or to oppose by force the authority thereof, or to prevent by force the execution of any law of the United States. The specific allegation proven in court, in front of juries, beyond a reasonable doubt, was that certain members of the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys conspired to use force to prevent the lawful transfer of presidential power. That is not a political opinion. That was a legal verdict, delivered by American citizens sitting in a jury box, after months of trial, after mountains of evidence, after cross-examination, after every procedural protection the American legal system provides to defendants. And now, the DOJ says it is not in the interest of justice to continue pursuing those cases. Let that land for a moment. Really let it land. Now let's talk about who is named in these filings, because these are not random figures. These are some of the most prominent individuals in the entire January 6th legal saga. First, Stewart Rhodes, the founder of the Oath Keepers. Prosecutors previously argued in court, and a jury agreed, that Rhodes plotted to oppose by force the lawful transfer of presidential power when Donald Trump lost the 2020 election. Stewart Rhodes was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. 18 years. That is one of the longest sentences handed down in the entire January 6th prosecution. Second, Kelly Meggs, the leader of the Florida chapter of the Oath Keepers, also convicted of seditious conspiracy, also named in Tuesday's filing. Third, Kenneth Harrelson and Jessica Watkins, also Oath Keepers members, also named. Then there are the Proud Boys. Ethan Nordine, one of the top leaders of that organization, was sentenced to 18 years in prison after being convicted of seditious conspiracy. Alongside him, Joseph Biggs and Zachary Rail, both also named in the motion. And then there is Dominic Pezzola. This is a name you need to write down. Pezzola is the man who was caught on camera, on video broadcast around the world, using a stolen police riot shield to smash a window of the United States Capitol building. He was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison, and now the DOJ wants his conviction vacated as well. These are not people who accidentally wandered into the wrong place at the wrong time. These are people whose guilt was established through evidence, witnesses, and verdicts rendered by ordinary American citizens doing their civic duty. And the Department of Justice, the very institution created to uphold the law, is now asking the courts to act as if none of it ever happened. Let me ask you something directly, and I want you to really sit with this question. If you were convicted of seditious conspiracy and found guilty by a jury, sentenced to 18 years in federal prison, do you think the DOJ would file motions to erase your conviction because the political winds shifted? Do you think the language in their filing would say it is not in the interests of justice to hold you accountable? Or do you think you would still be serving your time? I am not asking you to agree with me. I am asking you to think, because that is what this channel is for. And that question, that uncomfortable, honest question, is exactly the kind of thing you deserve to sit with. Okay, so now the question a lot of people are probably asking is, how is this even legally possible? Can the government just decide to throw out convictions whenever it wants to? The short answer is, it is complicated, and the complications matter a lot. Here is the background you need. On January 20th, 2025, the day he returned to office, President Donald Trump issued a presidential proclamation that commuted the prison sentences of the January 6th defendants to time served. That means they were released from prison without having to complete their sentences. Now, a commutation and a pardon are different legal tools. A commutation reduces or eliminates a sentence. A pardon forgives the crime itself and wipes the conviction. Trump's January 20th action was a commutation. It let people out of prison, but in many cases, it did not automatically erase the legal conviction from their record. This is where Tuesday's DOJ filings come in. What the government is now doing is going a step further. They are asking federal courts to vacate, to legally nullify the actual criminal judgments, not just release people from prison, erase the verdict entirely, and critically, they are asking for the indictments to be dismissed with prejudice. In legal language, that means the charges are permanently gone. The government cannot bring them again under any future administration, with any future attorney general, with any future evidence. The legal door is not just closed, it is being welded shut permanently. Think about what that means. No future president can reopen these cases. No future DOJ can revisit the evidence. Whatever a jury decided in a courtroom with witnesses, testimony, and deliberation is being permanently overwritten by the executive branch. I want to read you something directly from the filing because the language the DOJ used tells you everything about how they are framing this decision. Federal prosecutors in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia wrote, "In the executive branch's view, it is not in the interests of justice to continue to prosecute this case or the cases of other similarly situated defendants." Unpack that phrase, the executive branch's view. That is the Department of Justice explicitly acknowledging that this decision is coming from the executive branch, from the political leadership of the current administration, not from independent prosecutors weighing facts, not from career attorneys analyzing legal merit, not from a judge evaluating an appeal. The executive branch's view. That is a remarkable statement to put into a legal filing, because one of the foundational principles of the American justice system, foundational meaning it holds everything else up, is that prosecutorial decisions are supposed to be made based on the facts and the law, not based on who is sitting in the Oval Office and what they want done. The DOJ just put in writing that the executive branch's political position is the reason these convictions are being erased. They did not even try to argue the verdicts were legally flawed. They said the executive branch simply disagrees with continuing these cases. That is not a legal argument. That is a power move, and it is documented. Let me give you the broader context now, because no single event exists in isolation. You need to understand the full scope of the January 6th prosecutions to grasp the magnitude of what is being undone this week. More than 1,500 people were arrested in connection with the breach of the Capitol. 1,500. That represents the largest prosecution effort in the history of the Department of Justice for a single event. These cases took years to bring to trial. They consumed enormous resources, investigators, prosecutors, federal judges, courtrooms, appellate courts. Thousands of hours of video footage were reviewed and cataloged. Hundreds of cooperating witnesses came forward. Trials were held across the country. The result of all that work was convictions at every level, from misdemeanor trespassing all the way up to the most serious charge available, seditious conspiracy. And now, in a series of motions filed on a Tuesday afternoon in April 2026, that entire legal architecture is being systematically dismantled, every level, from the bottom up. And that word, systematically, is the one I want you to hold on to. This is not chaos. This is not error being corrected. This is a deliberate, coordinated legal process with a clear direction and a clear destination. The convictions are being erased. The indictments are being dismissed permanently. And the people found guilty of planning violence to stop the transfer of power are being, in the eyes of American law, declared innocent. I want to be very careful here, because this is where I want to give you the full picture. Not a convenient one, but the complete one. There are people who will watch this video and argue that these prosecutions were politically motivated from the start, that the January 6th defendants were treated more harshly than other rioters in American history, that the sentencing was disproportionate, that the system was weaponized against Trump supporters. I hear that argument. It is made by serious people, and I am not going to dismiss it. But here is what I need you to hold in tension with that argument. Even if you believe the original prosecutions were politically motivated, even if you believe every sentence was too harsh, the mechanism being used to correct that perceived injustice is itself deeply political. The executive branch is using its power to erase verdicts delivered by independent juries. The tool being used to fight perceived politicization is more politicization. And here is the real danger in that cycle. Once it becomes normalized that the executive branch can determine which convictions stand and which ones vanish based on political alignment, you have fundamentally changed what justice means in this country. It means justice is no longer blind. It means justice is directional. It flows toward whoever holds power at any given moment. And today, that might feel like the outcome you wanted, but governments change, power shifts, and whatever precedent is set today will be available to every administration that comes after, including ones you may strongly oppose. That is not a partisan point. That is a structural point, and it matters regardless of how you feel about January 6th. Let me stop for a second and ask you something real. When you think about the word justice, what does it actually mean to you? Is it a set of rules that applies to everyone equally regardless of who is in power? Or is it an outcome where the people you believe should win? How you answer that question determines everything about how you should feel about what is happening right now. Both answers have consequences, and neither is simple. That is the honest truth. Now let's zoom out, because Tuesday's filing is not an isolated event. It is part of a pattern that has been building since the first day of Trump's second term. The DOJ has also moved to wipe Steve Bannon's contempt conviction, the one tied to the January 6th investigation. Bannon was convicted of contempt of Congress for defying a subpoena from the House Select Committee. That conviction is also being erased. What we are watching is not a single legal correction. We are observing the systematic legal reversal of virtually every major conviction connected to January 6th. From the misdemeanor trespass cases cleared by day one pardons, all the way up to the seditious conspiracy convictions of the Oath Keepers and Proud Boys leadership, every level of the legal pyramid is being methodically taken apart. The timing deserves notice. These filings came in April 2026, more than a year into Trump's second term. This is not a rushed decision made in the chaos of transition. This is a considered, deliberate legal strategy playing out over time. Which tells you that this is intentional, planned, and far from finished. So where does this go? What should you actually be watching for as this story develops? First, the courts still have to act. The DOJ filing a motion to vacate does not automatically erase a conviction. Federal judges have to rule on these motions. And while courts often defer to prosecutorial decisions, the question of vacating convictions of people who were already sentenced raises distinct legal questions. Watch whether any judge pushes back or whether the courts simply process these like routine filings. Second, Congress. There are already legislators, primarily Democrats, pushing for votes on war powers and calling for investigations into executive overreach. Whether any of that gains traction in a Republican-controlled Congress is a separate question, but the pressure is building and it will not disappear. Third, public sentiment. Polls consistently show that a significant majority of Americans across party lines believe January 6th was serious and should be treated accordingly by the legal system. As these convictions are erased one by one, the gap between what people believe happened and what the government is choosing to acknowledge will grow wider. At some point, that gap becomes politically unsustainable. When it does, watch what happens. Fourth, and this is the one I want you to think about the most, the precedent question. If these motions are granted, all of them with prejudice, then every future administration faces an immediate question. Will they use the same mechanisms in reverse? If the answer is yes, then federal prosecutions of politically connected defendants become something fundamentally different from what they were designed to be. They become reversible, temporary, subject to the next election result. And a justice system that works that way is no longer a justice system in any meaningful sense. I want to take a moment to step back from the legal and political framework and talk about something that consistently gets buried in these conversations: the human dimension. There were real people inside the Capitol on January 6th. There were Capitol police officers who were beaten, sprayed with chemical irritants, crushed in doorways. Some suffered traumatic brain injuries. Some developed severe PTSD that ended their careers. At least one officer died in the immediate aftermath. Several more died by suicide in the months that followed. There were staff members and members of Congress who hid under desks, barricaded doors, and feared for their lives. There were pipe bombs discovered at nearby party headquarters. There were zip ties. There were tactical vests. There were radio communications among coordinated groups. When the DOJ says it is not in the interests of justice to continue these prosecutions, it is making a legal argument. But justice does not exist in a vacuum. It exists in relationship to harm. And the harm of January 6th was documented, real, and profound. The officers who survived that day are watching these motions get filed. The families of those who did not survive are watching. And the message being delivered to them in this legal language, in these court filings, is that the people found guilty of planning that day's violence will bear no lasting accountability in the eyes of the law. That is a human story as much as it is a legal one, and it deserves to be told alongside every other part of this. I promised you the full picture, so here is the counter-argument at its absolute strongest, because you deserve to hear it honestly. Those who support this action will point out that the January 6th prosecutions were unprecedented in scope and severity. They will argue that sentences of 18 years for crimes that did not result in deaths, while large-scale political violence in American cities during 2020 went largely unprosecuted, represent a double standard that corrodes public faith in the legal system from the opposite direction. They will argue that selective prosecution, where the DOJ aggressively pursues certain political actors while ignoring comparable conduct by others, is itself a form of injustice. And that if you are genuinely committed to equal justice under law, you have to be willing to correct overreach regardless of who is politically inconvenienced by that correction. That argument is serious. Because if the standard of justice truly did differ based on political affiliation, if identical conduct by a different political actor would have produced a fraction of the sentence, then the system was already broken before this week's filings. And a broken system does not repair itself simply because the people it currently harms happen to be people you disagree with. The honest answer, the one that makes everyone uncomfortable, is that both things can be simultaneously true. The convictions may have involved genuine overreach in certain cases, and the mechanism now being used to correct that overreach may itself represent a dangerous expansion of executive power. The tension between those two truths is exactly where serious American citizens need to be sitting right now. So what do you actually do with all of this? What does an everyday American, and not a lawyer, not a politician, not a commentator, do when watching something like this unfold in real time? The first thing, stay genuinely informed, not through headlines alone, not through social media algorithms built to feed you whatever makes you angriest, through sources that deliver full context, legal mechanisms, and honest accounting of complexity. That is the entire mission of this channel. The second thing, pay attention to your elected representatives. Your senators and your House members are voting on legislation and taking positions that either reinforce or challenge what is happening right now. You have the right to know exactly where they stand. You have the right to contact them directly, and you have the right to vote. The third thing, talk about this. Not to score points, not to win arguments. Talk about it in a way that invites the people around you to actually think. Because the most dangerous force in a democracy is not disagreement. It is disengagement. When people check out and when they decide none of this matters or nothing can be done, that is when the space for abuse of power becomes widest and deepest. The fourth thing, hold the standard consistently. Whatever you believe justice should look like, ask yourself honestly whether you are applying that belief regardless of who is in the crosshairs. Because if your sense of justice changes depending on which team is being held accountable, it is not justice. It is preference. And a country that governs itself by preference instead of principle has already lost something precious and extraordinarily difficult to recover. Let me bring this home. What happened on Tuesday April 14th, 2026 is not just a legal filing. It is not just a political event. It is a moment that will be looked back on, studied in law schools, cited in future courtrooms, referenced in arguments about executive power for decades to come. Because the question at the heart of it is not really about January 6th. It is not really about the Oath Keepers or Proud Boys or any individual defendant's sentence. The question is this: is the United States a nation governed by laws, or is it a nation governed by whoever currently holds the most power? That is not a new question. It is actually the oldest question in American democracy. It is the question the founders wrestled with in the summer of 1787. It is the question that every generation of Americans has had to answer for themselves, sometimes in courtrooms, sometimes in elections, sometimes in the streets. And right now, in April 2026, that question is being answered again. Whether you agree with the answer being written or not, it is being written. And it will stand unless enough people pay attention, speak up, stay engaged, and refuse to accept the idea that justice is something that can be switched on and off depending on who won the last election. That is what NationPulse is built for. That is the whole reason this channel exists, to give you the information, the context, the framework, and then to trust you to think for yourself and decide where you stand. Because you deserve more than sound bites. You deserve the full story. And that is exactly what we are committed to giving you every single time. If this video gave you something today, a new angle, a clearer picture, a question worth carrying into the week, do one thing for me right now. Hit that subscribe button, then hit the bell so you never miss a video. Because every single week, NationPulse is breaking down the political decisions, the legislation, the court rulings, and the government actions that directly shape your life, in plain language, with zero spin, and no agenda other than the truth. Share this video. Send it to someone who needs to see it. Post it, text it, put it where it will reach somebody who is still sleeping on what is actually happening in this country. And drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Tell me, do you think the DOJ's decision to vacate these convictions was the right call? Was it justice? Was it politics? Or was it something else entirely? The conversation does not end when this video does. It starts here.